Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the April 3rd regular meeting of council. The city of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory, upon which we gather with gratitude. Coming up first is the consent agenda, including minutes of the council meeting held March 20th, 2023, the minutes of the special council meeting held March 22nd, 2023, the minutes of the special council meeting held March 27th, 2023, and the approval of the council meeting agenda. I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Grams. That the consent agenda include the following recommendations be approved, which I just read out. I won't do it again. Are there any errors or omissions? Any further discussion? All those in favor? Those that carries. Thank you. For reports today, we have Mr. Russell, Director of Community Planning and Building. Could you please give us the background on the issue regarding consideration of a development permit to facilitate 3 duplexes at 151 Shelly Road to consider the issuance of a development permit? Mr. Russell.
Certainly, if I may, Mayor and Council, for consideration this afternoon is a development permit that, if approved, will facilitate 3 duplexes for a total of 6 dwelling units. Each building is proposed to be 2 stories with 3 bedrooms. And the applicant has indicated that these are proposed to be rental. And as part of the application that was presented to council, appeared on the council agenda previously, it's been adjusted slightly. So the building's a little bit closer to Tulip Avenue. This has allowed them to provide full backyards without needing a relaxation to the usable open space requirements. The applicant believes it better suits the siting of the property. It has resulted in a minor relaxation for the angled parking, that space that's closest to the road. And the recommendations are per the agenda to consider permit issuance.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Are there any questions for Mr. Russell while he's here before us? Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. To our Director of Planning. So I understand this project falls on the DPA 4. So I'm guessing it meets all the requirements of the DPA. Right. So when you say a rental, would it be a 10-year rental, or are they looking for a long-term, like, would it be even beyond 10 years?
Okay. So the rental isn't a requirement to the development permit. So it's entirely up to them whether they make them market units or rental units. But often councils have been curious what kind of tenure is proposed. And so staff reached out to the applicant just to provide you with that information today. I believe that as part of their CMHC funding, I believe they need a 10-year agreement, but it's completely separate from the form and character development permit decision.
Follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize. It's springtime. My body does not like pollen. As you mentioned, the CMHC Select program that they're getting funding from, I think the 3 requirements of that program are being affordable, accessible, and climate compatible. So I read this report. I think, first of all, 3-bedroom is kind of neat to see. We can have young families move in. But I'm a bit concerned about just 1 accessible parking spot of the 11 in total. Just to be more accessible, I guess I would like to see more accessible parking spaces, or if they're not designated handicapped, if they're like barrier-free parking, so even folks with walkers and whatnot can just go to their units. I was wondering if that can be addressed. And the other thing is the driveways I see are asphalt, and this council has been talking a lot about permeable surfaces. So I was wondering if they would consider something that's permeable for those driveways.
Certainly, if I may, through to Councillor Gaur. So a couple things. So the bylaw standard sets out what spaces are required to be accessible or not. And so the property is in conformance with the city's bylaws. with respect to the configuration of the parking spaces. Regarding the paved surfaces, so I did, indicate to the applicant that council is looking for permeable surfaces. In this particular case, because the property is going to be more family oriented where children will play, it was felt that the asphalt surface would be more suitable for children, playing with a basketball, etc. But in addition to that, the property itself is, has large yards where water can be absorbed, as well as the drainage from the pavement will be directed towards basically a drainage pit so that it will infiltrate into the soil. And so that permeability is being achieved without using pervious pavers.
And Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through to our Director of Planning. Thanks for the clarification on the surfaces. My son would be very happy to hear that basketball could be possible there. I just have a quick question regarding the storage of the refuse bins. We have 3 bins typically here, and just on the photo it showed 2 and only space for 2. So I thought I'd just check really quick on whether that would actually accommodate 3 bins.
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Grant. So that was also discussed with the applicant and to let them know that they need to accommodate 3 bins in there, and the dimensions proposed are the minimum dimensions. They may be larger than that when they're constructed. So that they definitely are aware of that, though, as well as also rigidity in case there's known to be bears in the neighborhood. So they've also been informed of being a little more durable.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Russell, I went by this property and I've knocked on doors in that area, and I think it's a great area for this particular development. For families and the whole thing. I just wanted to make that comment. I support this. I was thinking about the pavement. We've already talked about pavement. You've answered that one. So, and it's we can't tell what the rent would be at this point. I wouldn't think, it's market rent, right? You can't say. No. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Fraz.
Thank you through the mayor to Director Russell here. With the parking setback, they're providing more parking spaces than they're required to, and we're needing to provide a relaxation along the street edge there. How would that affect both the sightline and things like the walkability on the street? Noticing that there's not a sidewalk that finishes off that road. Would adjusting that setback prohibit us from having a sidewalk in the future there, or?
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Fraz. So the sidewalk is constructed on municipal property, and these parking spaces and their driveways and totally on the private property. So it would have no impact on any future municipal infrastructure within the road right away, including sidewalks.
And how about affecting the sight line on the corner?
The application was also reviewed by the engineering department. There's no indication of any sightline issues.
Thanks.
Thank you. And my comments on this project, I'm pleased to see this project come forward, providing 6 rental accommodations in a space of 3, which is great. And it's family oriented with a 3-bedroom as well. I was also pleased to see that it's being built to step level energy code 4, which was kind of a very desirable wish of council as well. I see the addition of heat pumps, and you already mentioned about the drainage pits for the stormwater diversion, which is all good steps. We're moving along in the right direction here. So thank you for your efforts and making sure that we get a good proposal here, Mr. Russell. Any further questions? Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. Just make a quick comment. Since this development is very close to the estuary lands, it's a very sensitive, ecologically sensitive area. And I'm very hopeful that all the construction waste and everything will be dealt with properly. And also, I was wondering have they considered any dark sky friendly lighting for this project?
If I may, Your Worship, Mayor, through to Councillor Gaur, the lighting is shown in the application package that is on the agenda. I'm just trying to find what page it's on here. Unfortunately, my thing is zoomed in, but it is primarily downward cast lighting.
Am I? Okay, thank you. Councillor Beal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, through to Mr. Russell. And yes, I'm also happy to see this come forward. It's nice to see some duplexes made. It's just something a little bit different and fits very well in with the residential area. My question is that, assuming that this is approved, do you have any indication of when this development would proceed or would start? I understand that the lot's been cleared and so on. So do you have any indication at all about that?
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Beal, I know they're eager to go ahead, but I don't have a definitive date.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question through to our Director of Planning. I noticed in the package, it describes the use of prefabricated walls and floors. That's something I haven't really seen, I don't think, before. I'm curious if you have any more insight into that and how that affects the building process and the.
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Grant, so it is becoming more common to have things fabricated off-site. In fact, Orca Place, the entire building was actually built in whole, complete sections, which is quite surprising for an apartment type building, but it is becoming more common. It actually allows for construction to occur under more ideal weather conditions. And there's also some economies of scale in that you can have prefabricated jigs set up to make things more efficiently, which tends to improve affordability. And that's probably important with a rental building such as these.
Good. Thank you. Hearing no further questions, do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that the report from the Director of Community Planning and Building dated March 28th, 2023, entitled Revised Consideration of a Development Permit to Facilitate 3 Duplexes at 151 Shelly Road, file 360 PDP 132 be received? Part 2, that council issue development permit number 23 PDP 132 to the owner of 151 Shelly Road to facilitate the construction of 3 duplexes, parking and landscaper. Need a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wood. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Russell. Another report, we have Mrs. Holmes, Director of Finance. Could you please give us the background on the issue regarding 2023 to 2027 final financial plan? Presentation for the draft 2023-2027 final financial plan regarding the equipment reserve fund and also any public input following Mrs. Holmes' presentation. Mrs. Holmes, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So today I'd like to go through the equipment replacement reserve, which, if you recall, is one of 4 components of our annual financial plan, and as well as provide you with some information about the types of things and how the process of the replacement reserve does work. As we do with each of our financial plan presentations, I just want to touch base on where we are in the process. So we've had a bulk of our meetings, but this week we'll be going through the equipment replacement reserve today, and then the water and sewer funds on Wednesday. And then next week, wrapping up with some decisions around direction that you've given previously, and then hoping to move to consideration of bylaws in early May. So I'm sure you'll recognize these are our public works vehicles that are replaced within our equipment replacement reserve and charged out to departments that use them as part of the reserve. What I'll note for you is that our equipment replacement reserve does not include the fire department vehicles. So it's essentially all of our wheeled equipment and vehicles outside of the fire department. To give you a high level kind of cycle overview of how the equipment replacement reserve works is starting at the top of this illustration, we have an equipment vehicle or purchase within the reserve. And from that, an internal charge out rate is determined that is charged out to those departments that use that equipment or vehicle. And the charge out rate is based on our either estimated or actual operating costs over a 3-year cycle, plus an amount for the replacement of the capital cost of it at the predetermined or estimated time of replacement. Then as city departments use those equipment or vehicles, the charges come through our payroll system. So an individual employee will use it, and then they'll say, I was also using this equipment, and it gets charged out to the departments that way. That essentially forms the revenue to the reserve. So all of those internal charges are the revenue that goes back into the reserve for future replacement of those vehicles. We have 2 full-time mechanics that do the work on our equipment and vehicles. And so as those fleet employees perform ongoing maintenance on the vehicles and equipment, those wage costs become costs to the reserve. Other expenses of the vehicles or equipment, such as insurance or external maintenance costs, are also tagged to each individual piece of equipment, and that becomes an expense of the reserve as well. Then at least 2 or 3 times a year, the fleet supervisor and myself, and more recently our capital asset position as well, review kind of where we're at on the reserve. What are our expected replacement dates, and do those make sense? What are our costs that we've been seeing for various vehicles? Do we think a sooner replacement is required just based on those maintenance records? In some cases, we might swap out vehicles that are being used. So if there's a pickup truck that's being used for a lot of hours, we might put in one that's being used for fewer hours just to extend the life of it. So we are always analyzing the replacement timelines as well as the appropriate kind of costs associated with regular maintenance. As well, annually, Finance Department records annual costs related to some of the vehicles. For example, some of the vehicles are just an annual charge to one department, and we don't charge it out hourly. If it's only one department that uses it, for example, the bylaw vans, it's just an annual charge based on their annual maintenance costs. And then we also record interest that is earned on the reserve, and that's done annually as well. Then as we accumulate those funds in the reserve, then as equipments are due for replacement at the appropriate time, and again, that's a bit art, a bit science. We have rough guidelines as to how long vehicles and equipment is kept, but the market may determine something else, or perhaps the vehicle's in very good shape and we think we might get 1 or 2 more years out of it. So that's where the art of it comes in. What we've seen recently is that our trade-in values are very high and the supply chain is very delayed. So it's made for some complexity in determining when those replacements should happen, including we're ordering in 1 year and not seeing delivery till 2 years later. So in terms of the financial plan, it's actually good that this is a self-funding reserve, and we'll go through a little bit of that in that if it doesn't get delivered within the budget year, we can just push it forward a year within the reserve. It doesn't impact property taxes or other user fees. And so as we replace that equipment on a schedule or as determined appropriate, then that's a cost to the reserve as well. And then we're back into the cycle where that new piece of equipment, then a new capital charge out rate is calculated related to that vehicle, and internal charge out rates are adjusted as needed based on the new actual cost until it's replaced again. So the couple of pictures here is a new mower that was replaced in last year's financial plan, but didn't actually arrive till this year. And then just a photo of our fleet building where maintenance, regular maintenance is done. Does anyone have any questions on the process before we go further?
Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. Through Mayor to our Director of Finance. So what we do with the used vehicles, are they just traded in or do we sell them? And if we sell them, does that money go towards this equipment replacement reserve?
Through the mayor. We typically trade them in. And as I mentioned recently, we've been getting very good value for our trade-ins. If it was determined that we wouldn't be trading it in, then it would go to auction per our purchasing policy. The other thing that sometimes happens, say with a mower or a smaller piece of equipment, is we might just keep it spare and not trade it in if we feel like the trade-in value doesn't actually impact it that much. And so it provides a backup machine if something breaks down. So in some cases, we do have that scenario, but for the significant assets, I would say we typically trade them in.
Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the Director of Finance, just to clarify, this is just for wheeled-based, essentially, equipment. Is the similar approach taken with any other sort of equipment assets?
It's not, but I would suggest to you that this is asset management at work, right? This is how we would like to have most of our significant assets working and being self-funded through reserves and contributions, because you can see that that regular costing and revenue tag to individual assets provides us with a lot of information, and we can fund it accordingly and doesn't kind of hit the property taxes every year, except for recently we've had a couple of very significant price increases. But right now, this is all we have is our kind of vehicle and wheel, but you could see it going to, say, IT equipment or other office equipment or fire department vehicles and things like that.
Any further questions? We'll take questions from the public when Ms. Holmes has finished her entire presentation.
A couple more comments on this. As much as I did note that this is a self-funding reserve, it does come back to council each year for approval as part of the financial plan. The other times it'll come back to council is if we've planned for a replacement at a certain cost, and then when we actually go to tender on it, it's significantly higher. And we've had that a couple of times in the last couple of years, in which case we come back to council and say, the financial plan includes the replacement at X dollars. The RFP came up at X plus $100. And then we'll have a recommendation of whether we feel that the equipment reserve can afford to fund the additional amount. And of late, that has been the case, or whether we need to plan for an additional transfer from our general fund or water or sewer to the reserve for that additional amount. The other time that it comes back to council is if we're adding a piece of equipment to the reserve. So last year, we added a new mower that is a shared mower between roads, water, and sewer. And so each of those funds contributed funds from last year's financial plan, property taxes and user fees into the equipment replacement reserve, and then the mower is purchased out of there. So that's the other time that we'll see an impact to user rates or property taxes.
Thank you.
Okay, one of the things that is kind of new to vehicle technology, I'll say, is just the electrification of fleets and vehicles and how that might impact the city. Our first electric vehicles were in 2017, and we purchased the 3 Chevy Volts that some of you may have used because they're used by employees and council to get to conferences and such. And that was kind of our first foray. They are a hybrid vehicle, so it's not completely electric. And so as we're moving towards the replacement of those vehicles, there's all new technology to be considered. So it's not as easy as, say, the regular pickup trucks and things like that that we've typically replaced, in that the technology is changing constantly. So that's something that will probably go right up until the year before and be tweaking those numbers as we go in providing council with a recommendation of how that gets replaced. And so if, for example, we go to full electric, what are the cost implications of that? In 2023, our fleet supervisor has recommended that the replacement of 2 sander spreaders, that we actually go with electric spreaders. And so for a similar cost, that's a picture of it there in the back of the truck. We were able to move to electric on that with some cost savings as a result of that. Upcoming also is our bylaw vans, and the current vans are no longer made in the same format. And so one of the things that was brought forward by the fleet supervisor is that perhaps we could consider replacing those with electric vehicles. And maybe that's kind of a lower impact type vehicle that could be electric. Maybe not all of our vehicles could be electric, and we're watching other municipalities' purchases as they get into kind of some of the heavier duty equipment. And can that be electric and still be effective in providing municipal services? So we've got the 2 bylaw vans in 2025 right now in the financial plan. As we get closer to that and our fleet supervisor starts to evaluate the replacement of that, we'll likely bring back to you recommendations around that. And maybe those are 2 vehicles, and others as we go through this, we'll start to evaluate not only just replacing it as is, but is there a greener way to replace that moving forward? So the key part of this is the technology is changing constantly. And so it's not easy to estimate at this point. And I mean, in many ways, it's an exciting time. Many of our suppliers, our group purchasing group that we're a part of, provides some PD with respect to fleet and buying electric vehicles and which ones kind of have been successful or not. So we're trying to partake in that PD and stay on top of some of the technological advances in that area so that we can consider other alternatives to fossil fuels.
Oops. Lady almost tripped. My heart's up. Councillor Press.
Through the mayor, Jetta, or Director of Finance here, do we have any coordination with other municipalities for doing bulk purchases or getting discounts? I imagine we're not the only one that's looking to shift over these fleets to electric vehicles, and for things like the sanders and spreaders, do we coordinate any of this with Qualcomm to maybe get the best of timing so that we're not putting in perhaps the same orders at the same time for the order length to be jammed up too much, or perhaps joining them for better purchasing power?
Right, through the mayor to Councillor Fraz. So we're doing a couple of things on that front. We're not explicitly working with other municipalities on that, but we are part of the canoe purchasing group, which has many, many municipalities within it. And we get savings in a couple of different ways that way. The first is that they actually go out and do the public procurement and then have vehicles or other equipment available that they've already done the procurement process for us. So we save time and money in preparing that and going to market. They have a market price for us already. And we've had a few vehicles and other things purchased that way, and it is quite efficient. And so we get the benefit of some bulk buying through that canoe purchase. And the other way that we're doing it is critically looking at our replacements and trying to bundle them together so that if we're going to purchase 3 vehicles over 3 years, let's put all of those pickup trucks together and say, give us pricing for 3 rather than for 1 each year. And so I think that we've been doing better that way. The third thing I would say is that our fleet supervisor keeps in touch with some of the significant dealerships that service municipalities and has built a good relationship in getting pricing information, in having perhaps some beneficial delivery dates and things like that. So it certainly has been a very challenging market, but those are the types of things that we're doing to try and get some benefit of group buying and perhaps bulk buying as much as you can bulk buy a vehicle. Okay.
Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. And through the Mayor to Director of Finance. Since there's a big push towards electrification of vehicles and stuff, are we looking into all the grants and rebates that we can get from the province or the federal government? And also, are we always looking to buy brand new vehicles and equipment, or are we looking for like the best deal and even get a used vehicle? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor. So your second question about used vehicles. Yeah, when our fleet supervisor is looking for equipment, he will contemplate whether a used vehicle maybe fits the bill. So recently we bought a used forklift that was good in that regard. We got really good pricing on it, and it does make the procurement a little bit more challenging because it's not apples to apples. So we have to kind of have a good judgmental eye at whether it really is a good value. And we are typically holding our vehicles for the longer term. So we want to still make sure that we're getting enough service out of it. So our purchasing policy does allow for that. And so we'll consider it if it's appropriate. And certainly for those type of unique vehicles, that might make sense for equipment. The first with respect to rebates, yes, we're watching all of this happening, and if there are rebates available, then we'll try and take advantage of that. I think they've been mostly directed at personal rebates rather than for government, but we certainly keep our eye open on those types of things when we are going down that road. Yeah.
Councillor Grens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to our Director of Finance. Could you help me understand how the sort of overall cost of ownership is contemplated when you're doing these calculations? Speaking of new technology and rapidly changing technology, the cost of ownership picture is very different for an electric vehicle, say, than a gas-powered vehicle or diesel vehicle. So when you're charging out a vehicle, how do you also contemplate the fuel cost difference between, say, electric or other form of fuel?
Right. So Mayor, through to Councillor Grens, our cost charge out rate is based on actual costs over a 3-year moving average. And then we look at the eventual capital replacement and kind of back it up to calculate an annual rate. Because of the evolving technology with electric vehicles, that's more challenging. So it really is a bit of a learning curve right now, as we've just had these first vehicles since 2017. These spreaders will be our second kind of foray into that. So I can't say that we have a real science around that yet because of the changing nature of the technology. I would say perhaps if we consider the replacement of the bylaw vans and the volts, then we might be getting some more information as to, you know, what did we pay in 2017? Okay, what are we paying now? And does that give us some more information as to how to factor in the replacement cost of that? I would say we're being conservative in our charge out rates because my expectation is that there are additional costs that we maybe haven't thought of. So just trying to be conservative in all of those estimates as we move forward and make sure that the reserve is in a healthy enough position to absorb some ups and downs in that regard until we learn more about that. We're also have opportunities to share at our GFOA conferences and things like that as to what other municipalities are doing in this regard. So through forums and things like that, trying to understand how other people are making decisions around that.
Yeah, follow up. Thank you. So just to clarify, the charge out rate would though contemplate the capital cost as well as the maintenance cost as well as the fuel cost. Or, okay,
Right.
So the math, I can understand the math and how that might work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question is under the electric as well, under the equipment section. It's a program of the city of Parksville to consider converting over the gas blowers, leaf blowers and so forth. I'm assuming that's going to come under equipment. It doesn't have wheels, but it's still electric. The gas blowers have been, you know, they're rather noisy. They're quite offensive, as well as their fumes from the gas and so forth. Would be well versed to switch over to the electric models that are available, as well as the grass trimmers, all the gasoline powered a conversion program. I understand the technology has improved significantly in the last 3 years. I'm just wondering if there's a specific program for replacing those with the electric piece of equipment instead of carbon fuel.
I don't know the answer to that. Our fleet supervisor is here, so I'm just going to look to him to see if he's had any part of that. Those types of equipment aren't actually within the reserve just because they're kind of fall below the threshold. It's more within our parks department, but I'll just look to Mark in case he has any guesses on that.
Thank you.
So those specific.
Right.
Multitudes of different leaders, criminals, and
That's the only answer I would like to hear, and you did it. So thank you very much on that. That's exactly where the direction I want to see this going. So thank you so much. Any further questions? Carry on. Thank you.
This is just a picture of one of the new larger vehicles that we purchased in the last year. Again, it was something that was a prior year budgeted item, but didn't get delivered till early this year. And we've also received that new mower in this year as well that we purchased through that canoe procurement group buying program. So getting to the numbers, and I try not to put too many of these types of spreadsheets up for you, but essentially what this shows is the summary of the ins and the outs that we've just discussed for the equipment replacement reserve. So the internal rental earnings are those internal charge out rates that we discussed. We've got a bump this year from the prior year because we've got a new piece of equipment in the mower in there, as well as the new replacement of some vehicles that we have purchase commitments for right now, and just reflecting those higher charge out rates as a result of the higher vehicles. For example, last year at this time, we had brought a new parks vehicle to council, and in the 3 months before the approval of the financial plan, and we actually went to RFP, the cost had gone up $60,000. So there have been some very significant increases. Fortunately, on the flip side, in some cases, especially for example, at the fire department, we've seen higher trade-in values. So our net cost has been okay, but in this case, sometimes those charge out rates need to reflect that higher future capital cost that we would expect. There's reserve fund interest that is accrued on this reserve every year as well. Proceeds on the sale of capital assets would be trade-in value that we expect to receive on vehicles and equipment. And then the transfer from the equipment replacement reserve is really just the balancing. Are we contributing to the equipment replacement reserve in a year or pulling from it with respect to purchases? On the expenditure side, we have all of the operational expenditures. Those include our fleet staff wages, any contracts or external repairs that are required. Our insurance costs, which actually dropped very significantly 2 years ago as a result of the reworking of ICBC. So that's been a real boon to the equipment replacement reserve. Parts and supplies, which ironically have actually stayed pretty stable over the last few years. So whether that's been fewer repairs have offset higher costs or whether we haven't seen the same increases there, but that has been fairly steady. And then fuel, which has been steadily increasing, and we do our best guess each year as to what that might be because the range in fuel cost per liter has been very significant as we discussed in one of our first meetings. So just to give you an example, in 2020, we spent about 95,000 on fuel. In 2022, we spent 155,000 on fuel. So it's a very significant increase. That said, over the COVID years, it's also hard, and the comparables in the equipment replacement reserve specifically are difficult because we had a lot of changes in how we used vehicles. For example, where we might have a truck that would take 4 employees out to a work site at the park or whatever, we now had people going in 4 different vehicles. And so that actually resulted in a lot of extra earnings to the equipment replacement reserve, but we had additional fuel costs and things like that to offset some of that. So we're getting to a point now where I feel like we're building some more relevant comparables, but it is a little bit challenging. But I think we all know that fuel costs have gone up very significantly. So we have about $160,000 of fuel budgeted for 2023. The next page is actually the specifics of what we intend or hope to be replacing this year. What I'll draw your attention to, though, is that although there's a total of 835,000 net expenditures expected with respect to the replacement of this equipment, only 172,000 of it was actually planned for 2023 originally. All of those other ones with a star beside them are ones that were budgeted in 2022 or 2021 that have had supply chain delays or we haven't been able to get. So that just shows you how impactful that is to trying to budget for the equipment replacement reserve right now. But again, we just bring that forward to council, and if there's a delay, it's all self-funded anyway. And so I feel like the risk to our overall financial situation, although it's not convenient for these vehicles to take so long, we're not losing the opportunity to tax for it where we have that ability to just roll it forward. And in the short term, earn some additional interest on the reserve while those funds sit there waiting. So we have already taken delivery of a couple of these, the mower and one of the dump trucks, and the rest will hopefully happen over the course of this year. Happy to take any other questions that Mayor Council may have on this.
Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. To our Director of Finance, and I'm sorry if you already covered this, but do we ever loan out our vehicles or fleet to other municipalities or governments? In case they ask for any requests for any vehicles from us? And do we charge them that could go towards our reserve?
Through the mayor. No, I'm not aware of that happening. The only situation that's similar to that might be the fire department in our mutual aid and things like that. No, I'm not aware of having done that.
Seeing no further questions, is there any questions from the gallery regarding the budget presentation today? Seeing none, Amanda, was there any correspondence with any comments or questions submitted? None? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So this will come back to you as part of our financial plan bylaw at the beginning of May.
Right, thank you. Moving on now, we'll go to motions from previous meetings. Councillor Gaur, could you please give us a background on the issue regarding temporary use permits? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. So the recommendation is staff be directed to immediately commence the process, including required public consultation to initiate a proposed amendment to the city's OCP bylaw, Plan Parksville, to allow for council consideration of issuance of temporary use permits in all areas of the city, and that this project be assigned high priority. So, Mayor and Council, Part 14, Division 8 of the LGA, the Local Government Act talks about the TUPs. I was looking at other municipalities in the area and governments, what they are doing in terms of TUPs. So I realized that electoral areas A, G, H, and the town of Pelican Beach, TUPs can be issued anywhere in the area for any use, but they're subject to performance criteria, obviously. So I was hoping we could follow suit and have something similar in our jurisdiction to give the council more flexibility in terms of land use. We can also control how these TUPs are affecting the community, the neighborhoods, or the environment, and set up those certain conditions. So I was hoping we can have a discussion over this and feel how the council is thinking about this proposal.
Certainly. So Councillor Gaur, I'll accept that as a mover. Do I have a seconder for this? Seconded by Councillor Sean. Councillor Wood, thank you. Since it is your motion, Councillor Gaur, do you have anything further that you want to discuss at that point? Or you've covered it? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment. Since I'm obviously a new councillor, I was surprised that we didn't already have this ability. And I think it sounds like a good idea, but I look forward to further comments in case there are any downsides to having it. Thank you.
I would just like to start off by saying, what is the community benefit for this? Because this is a very arduous process, as you can imagine. That's going to use a large amount of staff time. So I'm just wondering what the community benefit is to have this, the TUPs extended everywhere as compared to being restricted to zoning.
So if I may direct your question over to our CAO, and perhaps you can speak to some of the benefits that our community could have having TUPs in all the zones. I know you briefly spoke to me about this, but I think you can give a better background, please.
Thanks. So I can't really speak to the community benefit because that's really up to you guys to just decide. And we did discuss that there are timing issues that council has identified an OCP review. And so there are options to do this as part of that. So it'll be up to council to determine whether or not they want to put staff's resources into this in advance of the OCP review. It certainly would be something that would be reviewed during an OCP process. Currently, the OCP allows for consideration of temporary use permits in kind of the commercial zones, I would say. So tourist commercial, downtown core, industrial uses, and it does not allow for them in residential areas, which is fairly common, I would suggest, in best practices, just because it's usually supposed to be for something that would be temporary in nature. Something like either, like, for example, I guess a lot of resource uses have allowed that. So an area that's being developed may have a temporary use permit for a sawmill or asphalt batch plant to support the development. One of the areas that we probably would see it here in Parksville would be if somebody was developing a site and they wanted a temporary sales office to kind of have a show home or, you know, a show office for a multifamily development. So we haven't had any really in Parksville. We've had one application that wasn't supported by council most recently. But as for sort of pros and cons of the community, I think it gives council more decision-making power. Currently, you don't have the option as a council of reviewing a temporary use permit in residential zones. So that takes a decision, I guess, out of your hands. The applicant then has to actually apply for a full-on rezoning. I guess there's pros and cons to that. That kind of just depends on someone's philosophy. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that, like, really, I can only speak to kind of the technical side of it because the community benefit piece is not really a staff item.
Councillor Fries, you had your hand up. Thank you, CEO Taylor.
I think what I was going to ask was just for some of that background information there too. And I guess also I'll just ask a question to Councillor Gaur then too is why is this coming up and like where is that you've seen the gap that this would have solved the problem for it? Have we reached that point here before? And also if this is something that gets done in an OCP and we're due to be reviewing the OCP, why not just have it rolled into that process?
Go ahead, Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought about that as well, since we were planning on the OCP review. But again, we found that the OCP will not be finished before the end of our term. So it's like we are looking at 5 years down the road, perhaps, when the OCP is out and the TUPs can be issued. The reason for this proposal now is I'm hoping just to have a discussion over the council where the council thinks we should be at par with other municipalities, giving options, flexibility of having these temporary uses. Specifically, we had somebody asking for a recycling, perhaps over at 2 to 3 mills, and they were not even allowed to come and present their case to the council. So I think that was unfair for us not to even give the opportunity. We could accept or decline, but I think, and in the future, I don't know what might come up to us. I think we should be at least open to those options. So that's why the proposal is before the council.
Thank you. I would just like to respond to that if I could. The issuance or non-issuance of the temporary use permit at the Mill Street location was based on the fact that it wasn't applicable. It didn't meet the current zoning. So a temporary use permit would have allowed that, but it would have allowed the recycling at that. But the problem is that the zoning is there for a purpose. The zoning was there for purpose to being, in this case, the adjacent properties were residential. And so the residential had some protection that a recycling program in this particular case would not be opened up with everything included in a recycling program. So, the residents have located in that area knowing that in this case, a recycling program wasn't going to open up next door. And so that's why they were there. So by issuing the possibility of council actually issuing a temporary use permit, because we feel it's a very worthwhile venture, but that is totally against the feelings of the people that live in the residences and affecting their quality of life and their lifestyle, and for which they bought those residences. I think it's very dangerous actually to consider this in all areas that you suggested. The zoning is in place to protect the zone as it is, and to say that well, you could bring forth a worthwhile presentation or a proposal that council may override the zoning and then allow this to happen, albeit on a temporary use basis, but it's actually in an area such as residential. And so that could go on so many other places to very, as a residential area would find it undesirable to be in their neighborhood. And I feel that that would be unfair because I'm not even sure what the process would be of the residents in the area. So I'm not in support of this. And the other thing is that your indication was about, it was mentioned that it was to be assigned a high priority. But recognizing the fact that we've also had a workload study plan put out by our CAO, which is very cognizant of the fact that the staff have so much on their plate already, to suggest that this would happen in advance or before an OCP is rather kind of unfortunate for all those other plans that are already on the books. Thank you. I'll give Councillor Beal a chance. Councillor Beal, first time speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very interested in the possibility of having this come into being in all zones of the city. When I did also speak with our CAO previously, and I'm also going back to a response, a written response from our CAO, talking about bringing up the notion of temporary use permits and that they could perhaps be in other zones. Now, keeping in mind, I want to go back to the use of present zoning because it's actually based on the OCP as opposed to existing zoning, which is a slight distinction, but it's an important one nonetheless. One thing, my understanding about TUPs, temporary use permits, is that they do need to come to council. All of those factors that you mentioned would be considered by council. And certainly I would hope that whatever the council of the day is, would consider impacts to neighboring properties, residential and so on. And in fact, it can be denied. So I don't really see that that is a huge risk. I also think that it's very difficult for us to foresee all the situations that might come up. We had this example earlier of the request to have some drop-off recycling every couple of weeks, but that didn't come to council. But I'm also wondering if, as our CAO mentioned, somebody wanted to build some residential properties and wanted to have a show home, and that presently wouldn't be allowed under the existing zoning. I'm wondering if at some point in time, I don't know, a film set, a film company wanted to film something and something wanted to be created on a piece of property and they would need a temporary use permit. Now, as it stands, it can take about 6 months for this to go through. So I just think it creates a lot of obstacles. We're not flexible, we're not nimble, and yet if they do go ahead, there's still checks and balances, there are still controls. I'm going to read from here, a temporary use permit process offers some advantages as it can include terms and conditions to address possible nuisance concerns. Council can review the situation, choose not to reissue it if wished. And that long-term staff believe there's low risk associated with allowing people to apply for a TUP in all zones. It would provide additional options for all landowners in the city to seek council approval for temporary uses. So I don't know what sort of a demonstration setup there might be, a little pop-up, something. I just don't know. But I think that it would be nice to have this and that there are still checks and balances in place. But understanding that it would take about 6 months to actually get this into position, I understand the request for also making this a higher priority so that it could get done and be dealt with. So I would like to support this.
A question I would have is that the reason that you're wanting it done within 6 months is that possibly the overnight shelters or cold weather shelters and so forth, housing the homeless, would that also be one of the reasons why you like it in such short order?
I don't know if there's suitable property for something like that. Certainly there have been issues with where it's been right now. I really can't say. I'm honestly being very sincere here when I say that on the one hand, we can be proud of the fact that we were voted to be very resilient. I think that having something like this in place just allows us more flexibility going forward in terms of responding to, or not only responding to, but considering requests from the community. And again, if it's something that we feel does not fit the exact location, then so be it. But at least somebody can bring something forward.
I would hope that the protocol then would be definitely for some neighborhood engagement before looking at any temporary use permit, a neighborhood engagement regarding a very wide zone that could be affected by any temporary use permit beforehand. Yes.
Follow up, just that my understanding
yes.
is that it has to involve public input. That's part of the process.
Mhm.
In order to bring something like this forward, I understand, but perhaps our CAO could clarify that.
But as other temporary use permits that we've issued in the past has not had a huge neighborhood involvement as approving it. Yeah, to bring this one, I understand. Yeah. If the CAO could describe what that process would look like, what kind of engagement that would be. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, so through the mayor, there is a public process, but it's not the same as a rezoning process. So essentially, there's room for public input. And council in the past had a meeting, sort of like a variance. So if council thinks to the most recent variance application, the mayor will read out the application and then call for comments from people in the gallery. So that's a similar process for a temporary use permit. There is notice in our current procedure bylaw for development variance permits, and that would have to be contemplated if the temporary use permits were to change. But at the moment, it's 50 meters, 50 meters from the property lines where somebody would get a written notice. But we have, I would say, I suppose, in a development variance permit, there's notice through the public process as well beyond that 50 meters. And that is also something that council could address if they're bringing in a new kind of regime or new plan for that. But it's a public hearing process is very specific in the legislation, and a temporary use permit is not one of the items that requires a public hearing.
Thank you, Councillor Press.
Thanks. Through the mayor to council, I guess there's something that just really piqued my interest here. Maybe I'll just mention first, as you mentioned that we can address the 50-meter engagement boundary when it, okay.
If I may, yes, so if council were changing the temporary use permit program, so right now it's only applicable in certain areas, it could address other elements of that. So there could be different notice specified for that. Or even if it's for the DVP process, that's also a bylaw that can be amended. So council could direct staff to change that 50 meters for other items as well.
Yeah, because I do think in any kind of zoning adjustment, 50 meters is definitely not enough. We found many cases where it barely reaches anybody because it doesn't stretch across the street. It doesn't, if there's a commercial property next door, it doesn't go to those neighbors. And definitely the impacts to residential neighborhoods go beyond 50 meters. In regards to this temporary use permit, though, from what I've heard so far of it, my thoughts are that when it comes to security for residential areas, I think to me that's a no-go zone when we're starting to undermine that kind of their security they have in that. Particularly alarming for me is when the example brought up is the Mill Street property, because in this last winter, they had virtually no consultation and a huge disruption to their quality of life. They've been very patient. Like it's reading the letters that come in, I'm amazed at how patient they are, waiting for this day to come. And now here we are just a few days into April. And if I was that resident, I'd be going, what are you guys doing now? You're putting my property back up for, temporary uses to be coming in here in just a few months. I would be pretty upset as that. So I think going through the OCP, even though it is a longer process, I think there's a lot more comfort and security for the community, a lot more involvement, because we know these things that we pass here in council can happen in 1 or 2 meetings and people aren't paying attention or they're on vacation, they come back and now there's a new temporary use permit in their backyard. So I think the longer drawn out process is more appropriate, particularly because we're talking about residential neighborhoods. If it was addressing industrial commercial zoning, and this was like an ongoing issue that we were looking at, I think maybe that might warrant a little bit of speed, but for here, I can't support it for those kind of reasons unless I was convinced otherwise.
And I too can appreciate the fact that the longer term process, the OCP review allows for more engagement from everybody. If this is the case, even if we change the TUP boundary issues, or whether it's 50 meters, or even 500 meters, it would have to, it's on a one-off basis. And the trouble is, as Councillor Frass has mentioned, is that the 50 meters or 100 meters does not reflect the fact of security risk that's introduced to a much larger area by doing this. And I think it's very dangerous to do that. So I think it would be better to have full public engagement, explaining in an OCP review process of what this could look like, what it could possibly happen, and what plans could be in place to make sure that it was done properly, so that it was properly. Because we did take an awful lot of heat over what's happened along the Jensen Greenway for the last almost 6 months here from start to finish. And those people felt that they were not consulted. And I feel poorly about that they were not, their rights were abused. And I'm disappointed that that happened. And so I think that proper process would be to go OCP. And I believe that that's probably the most effective way of getting everybody's engagement in it. Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question through to our CAO, if I may. If you could just clarify what the process would look like for introducing this proposal. And I wasn't quite clear on what you're describing there in terms of the community consultation aspect. So clearly we'd have to do a process to approve this proposed bylaw change or OCP change. And then there would also be consultation required potentially as part of any temporary use permit. Could you just clarify the two different consultation processes?
If I may. So through the mayor, yes. So the first step would be to amend the OCP. So currently the OCP does not permit council to consider, it basically doesn't provide that opportunity for someone to apply for a temporary use permit outside of certain designated areas. And so for those that are interested, it's section 10.3 of our current OCP. It lists where you can apply for a temporary use permit. So if you're outside of those areas, which I mentioned, I might not get all of them, but it's basically the downtown core, commercial, industrial, tourist commercial zones. If you're outside of those areas in the OCP. And so when I say zones, we have zones in the OCP that are based on the designation map. Mostly it's residential areas with different types of residential zoning that are not now afforded an opportunity to apply for a temporary use permit. So the OCP amendment process requires legislative consultation. So there's pre-statutory process consultation required. So before we create a bylaw, we have to do consultation. Normally it's with folks like the RDN, our neighboring municipalities, certain ministries, provincial government ministries, sometimes with the school board. So those kind of agencies we're required to consult with them initially. Then council decides who we're going to consult with as part of the process. There's additional consultation requirements in the legislation for an OCP when compared to a zoning bylaw amendment. And then at some point there is a public hearing requirement. We also require applicants to do kind of like an open house. So we would probably have to do our own open house on that kind of thing. That's been our past practice. So if after those steps, it's similar to a zoning amendment where you have readings of the bylaw. And so typically the more readings you have separately, the more consultation there is. So while legally you're allowed to do like first and second reading together, sometimes councils decide to do first reading at one meeting, subsequent meeting, second reading, then the public hearing will occur. So there's a bunch of different options for council, but typically speaking, you do those readings. And those happen at different council meetings with time for staff to prepare the next step. So our experience, even with very organized applicants, is that 6 months is the minimum bylaw amendment process to jump through all of those requirements. If it's a city initiative, it could be kind of a 4 to 6 month, but that is with basically everything else being put on hold in that department, including some of our applications that folks have paid for. We would have to prioritize the resource that we have there. It would basically be the director working on it. So once the OCP process has ended, there would most likely be implementation items like amending the bylaw, which we have a procedure bylaw that currently stipulates the notice provisions, as Councillor Fraz mentioned, and the procedural steps for applications. We also have a development process bylaw that talks about information requirements. So for example, if someone's submitting an application, they have to provide, proposal, copy of the title, background information on the property, those kind of technical things. So those would need to just be reviewed to make sure they're consistent with the new change. And then often we have to provide, obviously we'd need a new form that would allow for consideration in a wider area. And we would usually anticipate things like a brochure or something along that nature to explain to folks, what's the difference between a temporary use permit and a zoning bylaw amendment, those kind of things. So we think 6 months is kind of the minimum time frame. Depending on what happens, it could be a little bit longer than that, and it does require a fair amount of staff time to navigate that process.
Thank you. So yeah, through the mayor to council, that does sound like a lot of work. And I'm personally not seeing a huge benefit that outweighs the cost in this situation, which would make it harder for me to support the motion. I also think, just sort of speaking more generally to the motion, is that this comes down to a question of, do you prefer a more kind of constitutional democracy or a more of a kind of direct form of democracy? Constitutions provide stability and predictability. Even people who don't pay attention to what's happening politically in their area can still count on the Constitution to protect their rights. And I'd say that zoning and the OCP are the equivalent of that in basically a municipal setting, that even if you are not plugged into the latest happenings at the council table, you know that there are certain expectations around the use of property in your area and the ability of you to enjoy the use of your property. So I'm concerned that shifting the bounds away from the more predictable form towards the less predictable form is also subject to some more potential abuse by future councils, or I mean, I wouldn't say abuse, but just unpredictability. You could have a council that may want to use the temporary use permits as a way to skirt the more predictable, stable form of governing our community. And that could present some real issues for people's use and enjoyment of their property. And so for that reason, I have, the wider issue, I have those concerns around this. But in terms of our overall, turning back to the description that our CAO just provided, we've just gone through a process of strategic planning, and I don't really see how this fits into our strategic plan. And for that reason, the use of staff time on this doesn't seem to be appropriate to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yes, thank you to the mayor. This is quite an explanation. It's a big deal. On the other hand, who else has this? Other communities have this? Why don't we have it? Is this common to have this temporary use plan? From what I understand, it is, right? Is it in Qualicum? Do we have this in other areas? Because that was the research that was done, right? Are we the only ones that would have this? Yes?
If I may, through the mayor.
Go ahead.
So
Okay.
I do not have time to research what's happening in other communities, so
Oh,
I can't
okay,
really,
I see.
I can't speak to that. But I will say from our perspective in Parksville, there was a conscious decision and discussion when the OCP was brought in 2013, that at the time, the best practice was not to have temporary use permits in residential areas. Part of that is that it creates a challenging situation. If you have a residential use with a 2-year, 3-year timeframe, inevitably there's someone displaced, and that is not really considered a best practice. And then there's also legislative issues that kind of conflict in that residential tenancy rights or other human rights around housing may not line up with the local government use kind of terms. And, something ending on a specific date, kind of in a 3-year window, just creates, I think, a lot of headaches, which is, in my understanding, kind of anecdotally of just talking with other planners in my former career. Temporary use permits for residential purposes are not usually a common thing. I can't speak to the fact of maybe other cities allow someone to apply for that, but that's our rationale for Parksville, why it doesn't, it's not just every single zone.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Through yourself to Councillor Gaur. After hearing all the discussion, which I really appreciate everyone's viewpoint, I would, considering all the staff time that it's going to take in the next 6 months, I would lean away from the urgency. And if we wanted to incorporate it into the OCP review, which is in our strategic plan, that's how I would lean myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beal.
Yeah, good discussion here. Thank you, everyone. I do have a question. Something that I understand is somewhat particular to our community is that zoning, what's permitted in different zones can be very, very specific. and, you know, something that you might think would fit in there, it doesn't. If it's not actually noted, then it's not permitted, in some cases anyway. And so I'm just curious if there is something like I understand that there's going to be a request for a rezoning so that a property not far from here would allow for a rehab facility. And right now, it doesn't specifically say rehab, although it's been used for seniors residence or assisted living and other things, but not specifically rehab. And so there needs to be an application for a rezoning or an amendment or something. So what I'm getting at is, so in residential areas, if an organization wanted to have some sort of a transitional housing of some sort, I'm not talking a shelter, I'm talking about, you know, some sort of transitional housing. Is that something that would be permitted at present in the residential area? And if not, would something like a temporary use permit allow someone to do something like that? And then if it's successful, they could apply for something more permanent. I'm just trying to see again, if that can provide a little bit of flexibility and allow someone to test the waters, as it were.
I would see the answer maybe coming from yourself, CEO Kaler, or Mr. Russell regarding what is allowed in the residential area. Is a residential area allow for transitional housing, and what does that look like? Maybe that's a question I heard.
If I may, I'll start because I think there's a couple of nuances there that I am going to give the planning answer of it depends, which I know people get annoyed about, but it really does depend because some of the situations that are being discussed have site-specific zoning. So that's a complicating issue in Parksville. In all communities, I would suggest we have comprehensive development zones that are site-specific zones. And so those are different than what we would call kind of an on-the-books zone or a template. So for example, for those who don't read zoning bylaws for fun, you can have, say, a residential 1 zone, and that's almost like a standardized zone that applies to all single-family dwellings pretty much. But then you could have single-family dwellings in a commercial zone. That's also kind of allowed. So I would say there are generic uses that are allowed in most zones. There are site-specific zones in Parksville that were created on a one-off basis where the pros of that or the benefits of that is that it's tailored to that exact development when it's coming before the council. And it's basically, they're not sort of bound by the standard setbacks or height or uses that would be kind of in the generic zone. So we have roughly about 30 properties in Parksville that have comprehensive development zones. And so one of the challenges of a comprehensive development zone is 10 years from when it's adopted or 15 years from when it's adopted, it's not as easy to add things or modify things because it's really very prescriptive and written for a particular time, a particular use, and a particular building quite often. So that's one area that's challenging and kind of not necessarily related to the temporary use thing because a lot of them are in like downtown areas. The other piece is that residential uses, if they're again kind of, I guess, normal or reasonable uses, then they are allowed in the residential zones. So, you know, we don't necessarily even get involved if, like, say, for example, you're a foster parent or you're a caregiver, that's just residential use. So the city doesn't get involved in those per se. So it's not easy to answer all eventualities with one question, but I think, again, thinking back, even if we were to have a proposal for a temporary transition home, 3 years comes pretty quickly after the proposal has been adopted, and you still now have the situation where there's people whose home is timing out, I guess. And so that was our rationale for not having residential uses kind of temporary in nature. It's always awkward. It's always difficult when you have to tell someone you can only, even if you tell them right up front, you can only live here for 3 years. 3 years comes and they're like, well, I thought something would happen and I would be able to stay, right? So that's where we try to regulate more the use with a lower impact on the user. And so in a residential setting, that's very hard to do with a temporary a temporary proposal. So that's kind of our rationale, but you know, you're right that Councillor Beal is correct that there are some situations where there's either a site-specific zone or a specific use that in Parksville, you have to have that use listed as a permitted use for you to do it. And that's, I would say, a relatively common way to interpret zoning. That's kind of what provides the regulation of the use itself.
Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. And that was the purpose of this proposal today, just to get everybody on the council is thinking about it. I was not, pushing to like it has to pass, or I need everybody to support, or at least the majority to support this. But I'm glad like we all got to speak of this anomaly that Parksville has, where we do not have TUPs in all the zones like other municipalities in the area do have. And our OCP and zoning being too prescriptive, in my opinion, and we cannot amend within a zone the uses either. So I was hoping TUPs could fill that gap. I'm okay if the council does not feel there's enough support for this at this time. But I do want to mention one thing about 2 to 3 mills being a center of concern. Yes, I'm also getting those emails. I understand this has been a problem. There have been issues on the Jensen Greenway. The neighbors have been adversely affected. That had nothing to do with the TUP. We never issued the property a TUP. They can easily go and open it this winter again. Can't they?
Go ahead, CAO Kaler, answer that question.
If I may, through the mayor, I am a little bit cautious about speaking about a specific property. I don't think that's really appropriate, but generically speaking, there are certain emergency situations. And I believe that in the case that we're talking about, there basically are other uses like public assembly, which are allowed in many properties, church properties, some commercial properties, other zones. And so there's emergency situations that occur where a council basically allows things as an accessory use in an emergency temporary situation. And I would say that that's been a common interpretation in Parksville for many years with respect to churches and kind of those social uses. But if something were to be happening on an ongoing basis, so seasonally every year or on a year-round basis, then our staff's position on that is that it does require the correct zoning.
Thank you. That answer your question? Yeah. Carry on, yes.
Thank you, CAO. So yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mention one specific property, but they never came to us as a council to seek approval. So I understand the apprehension of the council, especially from the pushback from the community we've had. But like I said, I was just hoping to get this, just get a feel of what the rest of the council feels about this proposal. And if the mayor is willing, and the secondary is willing, we could defer it to when we do the OCP review to have a look at what other municipalities are incorporating the TUPs into and what are some of the uses that are beneficial to the community that could happen.
Would that be best to defer or to withdraw the motion?
I'm not sure.
Okay, sorry. Councillor Fraz.
I can just make a comment, just as going through council previously and having these kind of things here. If these are coming up as a motion at council meeting, in my opinion, would be that we should vote on them for better or for worse. If it's just to bring them up for a discussion, I think a committee of the whole is a great way to put items like this that we want to discuss just for exploration, so that we're not bringing it forward as if we're going to be making a decision on this, because I listen very intently and come here plan to cast a vote. So
right.
As far as deferring it, like those are all options. They're, I think, roundabout ways of dealing with it, but I think keeping them specifically the focus of what we're here to do. So in my opinion, council meeting where we have motions brought forward, we should vote on them, and then the exploratory things to committee of the whole.
Yes, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you through to Councillor Frass. I was hearing though from Councillor Gaur the option to defer this to our OCP. And so if that's the case, then one would vote on that, I believe, when that comes ahead. But also just a point of clarification that I don't believe that we would draw motions. We might defer it or vote on it, I should say, but that option is there to defer, in which case we don't vote. Right?
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
Okay, there, okay.
carry on.
You do need to vote on a deferral, but there's no debate.
If I can question your use of the word deferral, you're like deferral to the OCP review, but isn't that already going to happen as well? Why would you need to defer that? Because it's going to be there already. That's why I'm just saying, if we could vote on your original one, that would still allow for this, as you say, to be, we in our strat plan, we have approved the OCP review, and it's automatically, as staff has advised, that it's going to be, that could be reviewed at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't have to defer it, as Councillor Fraz says, vote on it right now, the original motion. Instead, I'm just saying, and knowing full well that we have staff's word that we'll be able to look at it at the more encompassing. Does that work? Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, it should be. That's where. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor, through yourself. It sounds like we would just be voting on the urgency then of the original motion, which should be fine, in my opinion. If we're going to take it to the OCP later on, then really our vote can be speaking to the assigned high priority part of the motion.
All right, CEO Kaler.
If I may, just to clarify, so it would be a normal practice to review the temporary use rules or the temporary use applicability when you're reviewing the OCP.
Call the question. All those in favor of the original motion on the table? That motion fails. Thank you. So we have another one. So we have a notice of motion from Councillor Wood. Could you please give us a background on the issue regarding amendment to travel expense reimbursed policy number 7.6? This motion has been provided on the agenda in lieu of notice, so council can vote on it today. At today's meeting. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. This is just speaking to a gap that is in our travel expense reimbursement. We're just asking for staff to prepare a proposed amendment. What the idea is if I'm scheduled to go to a conference and I can't make it for whatever reason, the way the booking works is staff have to book it way ahead of time, whether it possibly be flights or hotel, et cetera, registration for the conference itself. So there can be significant costs incurred with these conferences. And if I can't go, then I have to just be very open about why I can't go. And then we can talk about it. Well, it depends on what the staff prepare as a proposed amendment. But the idea is that there's a little bit more transparency and accountability with us saying, yes, we'll go to a conference. So it's just really adding some transparency and some accountability to what we already have. So that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Since you're presenting the motion, I will ask for you to do, you can read the recommendation as presented if you would, Councillor Wood.
Sure, thank you. The motion is that staff prepare a proposed amendment for council consideration to council policy number 7.6, travel expense reimbursement, to include terms and expectations for council participation and attendance at registered conferences, seminars, and training events, including the requirement to repay incurred costs when a council member fails to attend an event for which they are registered or fails to cancel by the appropriate deadlines, leading to incurred costs for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Beal. Thank you. Councillor Wood, you have the floor again if you need to add any more, or are you good? You did, but that's all right. You can do that. That way we know what you're presenting. Thank you. Councillor Beal.
Thank you. And personally, when I read this, I absolutely will support this. It just seems like common courtesy and common sense. You know, if I get an invitation to something, I'm going to let people know if I'm going or not. And if something's come up well in advance, I'll advise. I would just like to know or be assured that if something really extraordinary, and I'm literally thinking something like a death in the family of serious illness or someone falling ill, if there would be some mechanism by which an individual counselor would be able to request sort of an exemption, if you like. But again, that's, you know, it's very unlikely that that would be the case. I would certainly hope that that things go smoothly and that people are in fact able and willing to attend when they sign up for something. But absolutely, we should all be accountable for what we're doing, and it's professional development. It's really important to take advantage of these learning activities as well.
Thank you, Councillor Beal. I believe CAO Kaler has a little more background as to your question as to somewhat latitude in some circumstances.
Thank you. If I may, through the mayor. So I did speak with Councillor Wood on this one, just talking around some ideas, and essentially what he had envisioned, if I may speak for him, was that we would have basically, if you notify in time, then we reduce the costs, but also there would be some ability for someone to appeal to council, so that if something came up and there was an emergent situation, then you would be able to speak to that, and council would decide what if you had, you know, basically got a waiver and didn't have to repay. And so obviously staff would take that into consideration when preparing the items for you to approve.
Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Beal? You're good with that? Yes. Councillor Gaur.
Thank you, Mayor. And I understand why Councillor Wood brought this motion forward. Accountability on elected officials, I think it reflects really important for the public whose tax dollars we are using and getting paid for. What I am a little concerned is being a single parent where our schedules are not flexible, how that may affect. And also when CAO mentions that, some member can appeal to the rest of the council. How much staff time would it take for, like, say, $100 registration? Then we are debating over this. I really want to make sure it is not, it serves the purpose it's supposed to, rather than creating this, bad work environment eventually. I think we're all elected officials, and I really hope we take our job seriously, which I've, had the privilege of working with you all. I realize that you all are very sincere. So I really want to be assured that this actually serves what it's supposed to, rather than being overly punitive.
I can maybe talk on that somewhat. The idea is not to be punitive at all. That is certainly not it's like we don't have bylaw enforcement, we have bylaw compliance. And the hope is, by putting these rules in place, that everybody complies by the rules to be accountable. And that's why I will be supporting this. If, as you mentioned, like your single parent issues come up, if it's one of those things that the bookings are done so far in advance, and you would definitely look at the itinerary and see that this is a 3-day event, that is a large amount of money is paid for a 3-day event. So you would have to, under your personal circumstances, understand, am I going to be available for all 3 days of this event? If so, then I will put my name in to attend. And it's basically the action is on yourself to decide if you're going to be there. As Councillor Beal has mentioned, if there's circumstances coming out, and as a single parent, I understand if your individual is, has to go to the hospital or something like that, but that's definitely going to be the latitude required, to not attend. But it's just a question of just think twice before you apply for registration on this, to make sure that you have an all good attending the session in full that they're paying for, because we pay for every day. So I think it's good to, just like the accountability. We're not looking for punitive results at all. We're just looking for accountability that we can all be proud. Councillor Frass.
Yeah, thank you. To me, there's two parts in here. There's setting up the expectation parts of it, which I think are great. I think it's always good when we know what the expectations are that where we're going into, but then there's this other part where kind of seems to me like a little bit like a babysitting portion of it. And where we're having to justify and explain our lives to other people. And that's the part where I think as elected individuals, I don't think we owe an explanation to each other. And I don't want to know about people's personal lives, as you mentioned about being single parents, my parenting arrangement, nobody's business. My medical situation, nobody's business. Because we're discussing this, and I do think it's kind of timely here, actually, that recently we had an LGLA event that I wasn't able to attend to. The cancellation process, you mentioned, we have to sign up quite much in advance to it. And, sometimes there's significant costs. I think in LGLA, for example, where it's happened locally here, it's just the course registration. But if it's something like FCM, where you're traveling to Ontario, incurring flights and hotels and so on, it can be pretty significant for sure. But when things come up, like where we had a death in the family and I don't attend an event, I don't want to have to come to and tell people, this is what I can't attend here now. And now I'm juggling a parenting situation here. And also, I'm a private person. I don't share my work life with anybody. I don't share my personal life with anybody. And personally, when things like that come up, I will not be coming forward to have to explain or ask for justification or sympathy or give you a doctor's note or anything like that. I won't be asking for if I have your permission to be able to get out of an event. We're all adults here. So that's the way that I look at it, is we don't have to justify that. I think if there's a nefarious reason going on or something, then those are where the expectations can lay it out there and we can address it. But in my opinion, this added portion where would throw significant costs at individuals, I think that's beyond what we should be looking at here. The setting up the expectations, though, portion of it though, and getting some staff feedback, I do think there's a gap in that portion of it. Otherwise, I just don't think we're really addressing a problem here that's been something that we've really had as an issue on council. So it's not something I'm going to support at all.
Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor?
Excuse me, I wanted to.
That's,
Yeah,
sorry. Okay, I looked around. Yes, yeah, Councillor Martin.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been listening to all this and we all have personal lives like Adam says and Councillor Frass says. And I find, like even myself, I had to miss a council meeting last Monday. And it was an emergency situation. I was out of town. But I felt that we could talk to, like the CAO. This is not a counseling service or anything. This is just a communication situation. And I felt very good about that I could tell her or him, whoever it is our CAO, really, what my challenge was. That was personal. I don't expect our CAO to run around telling her, oh, so she couldn't be at the meeting because it's no one's business, right? And I think this is sort of a similar situation. I mean, yes, it wasn't a cost. I missed voting for a couple of things and I was able to get up to speed, which I did since I came back. But I don't know. I just think that when we sign up for something and then we just don't show up, there has to be communication with somebody. And I think the CAO, to me, was really perfect. It wasn't going anywhere else. It was no one else's business. And it's sort of similar, really. That's just my thought. Anyway, I had to share that because it just happened to me last week.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Martin. And I can, you've kind of nailed it when saying it's a courtesy communication. And if for reasons of privacy and so forth, I feel that it is done with the CAO is obviously sworn to privacy in as many ways as we are, perhaps more even. So forth, I think that is because once again, it's the individual. What if they didn't show up to the event and it's in Whistler or something like that? Then all of a sudden nobody knows where the individual is missing. It's like, do we put out an APB? Do we call the police? If no one is advised and the person has not shown up, it's, there's a safety issue here as well. Maybe, something's happened to this. And if the CAO knows, he'll just say that individual is not going to be in attendance, period. And leave it at that. So thank you. Councillor Press.
I think the situation you're describing though is different than what we were talking about here, because it was mentioned that if they cancel after the cancellation period, so I don't think it's a matter of them expecting them to be there and they're not there. If they cancel the event, for some of these things where they're booking hotels, cancellation can be 30 days before. For whether it's FCM, AVICC, UBCM, LGLA, they all have different cancellation things. If the canceling and incurring the cost was the argument, not about a safety concern, maybe we should be advocating for better cancellation policies and more flexibility, knowing that life can be unpredictable, and saying to LGLA, here's a circumstance we're having to cancel. It's 2 weeks in advance there, or to the hotel. Can we get that money for the next time around type of a thing? So maybe we can be looking at better cancellation policies if it's about incurring costs. The safety part of it, I think those kind of get covered if it's a week before or 2 weeks before saying, hey, can't make it. But again, my argument being that having to bring a reason forward that then has to be kind of like for everyone to weigh on it, and they get to be the judge and juror and say, oh, that's a good enough reason or not a good enough reason. It brings in risk of it being a popularity contest, brings in risk of it being political, brings the risk of like all those other types of things. So unless those are also laid out in the expectations, these are acceptable circumstances, and these ones aren't. So it's, hey, there's a really good concert that I want to go see. Maybe not a great reason if you're signed up for it. But as elected officials here, I don't believe anyone, when I look around the room or any counselor I've known sign up for events just to spend the money and not go. Like I've just never seen that happen. So that's why I say it's a solution to a problem. I don't really think it exists, but closing the gap on the expectations and maybe laying those out is a good starting point.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council, for the discussion. Lots of great discussion today. Like with the last motion, the question I ask myself is whether the benefit outweighs the cost, and always being mindful of staff time and all that. I do want to make sure I'm taking that seriously. I agree with Councillor Faraz's point that some more clarification in all this about what the expectations are is definitely good. However, when our CAO suggested a potential solution or process for dealing with these matters, which would be that it would come to council, I'm a little concerned for the same reasons that I was concerned about the discussion about the council code of conduct, that could also have a similar mechanism where it becomes a voting council voting against each other. It's not a good way to have a good relationship, I think, at the council table. So those are my concerns on it. I understand this is just a report, asking staff to prepare a report. So for that reason, it's more a question to me whether the benefit outweighs the cost to staff on this particular item, without having to weigh in on the actual merits of whatever plan they would bring forward. So just some thoughts on the topic.
Councillor Beal.
Thank you. I do appreciate that that there might need to be a little bit of tweaking at the end. And certainly I agree with Councillor Frassen that, privacy is to be respected. And if one is communicating with the CAO, for instance, if something unusual or extenuating circumstances have arisen, I don't read this to mean that somebody needs to give chapter, verse, and paragraph, about what exactly has transpired, but that, that something significant has occurred and someone is not able to attend whatever event was there. But going back to picking up on what Councillor Frass was saying, that, I think that there are times in our lives, and certainly been times in my lives, when it was hard to predict what the schedule was going to be like with children and other things going on. And maybe at that time, I wouldn't be signing up for a significant conference that was going to be at great cost, because I would know that, it's a little bit iffy whether or not I could actually attend. But I think that I would hope that in many circumstances, one can plan far enough ahead that that generally speaking, one's able to go. But if one can't go, then we can let staff know not to sign us up for that, and maybe do things remotely, virtually, to learn what's taken place, or meet with someone later on and read everything that way. But it makes it clear that there is an expectation. We're using taxpayers' money to pay for us to attend these events. And I think that it's reasonable to have some accountability, and it should be taken seriously and looked at. If something unusual comes up, I think that one could communicate with the CAO And perhaps if there needs to be tighter wording, fine, or if it just needs to be a little bit open, that's fine. I certainly agree with Councillor Gren's comments that, coming forward, actually, cap in hand to, literally to council to have a vote on it might not be the best way for building, continued good relations, but to have some mechanism in place so that there is that communication and understanding, understanding what's expected. I don't think that's unreasonable at all.
So in the hopes of trying to achieve consensus here, if Councillor Wood would be willing to make an amendment to what have we just end off the expectations for council participation and attendance at registered conferences, seminars, and training events. Period. Stop that, Wood. Councillor Fraz, I'm trying to, if Councillor Wood is amenable to, perhaps I would like your comments, Councillor Fraz, would that be more amenable to you?
Yeah, I actually agree in that sense that there is a gap there as far as what the expectations are around that. And I read it both the two ways. One, if it's saying that you must register and attend extracurricular events, because my understanding that they're not required, like, and in fact, like cases like FCM, there's only one person that goes at a time. And so it's not possible for everyone to attend. But yeah, if that's what it's asking for, like you must attend the UBCM in the fall, or if it's saying that when you attend UBCM, you must attend this seminar at the, because we get a compliment to choose from. So to what degree is it asking? I think having those expectations around that, there is a gap there for sure. So it's the portion I have a problem with is when it starts to become that punitive part, because as you mentioned, it is significant costs. Affordability of life is hard for everybody. It's not, I know some people think that counselors are this different elite class of people, and not just that we're citizens from our own community. They're elected here. And so those would be significant costs that roll onto our shoulders. And too, I wouldn't attend any events if it meant that I had to pick up the government rate of these conferences, because they're not at the same rate that it would be if it was just like a weekend event that we would handle as a private citizen. So that part I would be agreeable to, as long as it was clear as to what it's saying. Is it saying that you must attend, sign up for and attend events? Because in that case, then we definitely shouldn't have to be carrying those costs if it's a requirement.
Thank you for that, Councillor Fraz. Councillor Wood, I'll bounce back to you now. If you would be willing to put through a friendly amendment? Yes. Second, yeah. So far so good. Yeah. Councillor Wood has agreed to move to a friendly amendment to the wording. Councillor Gaur has seconded. Do we want to have Councillor Wood read what it would look like at that friendly amendment?
Thank you, Mayor. And through yourself to Councillor Fraz, it's not to make sure that you are mandatory attending and signing up for things. That's not really the idea. If we choose to go or we choose to sign up, there'll just be some expectations around that. Hey, we signed up for it. So the friendly amendment, we're going to kind of truncate it to that staff prepare a proposed amendment for council consideration to council policy number 7.6, travel expense reimbursement, to include terms and expectations for council participation and attendance at registered conferences, seminars, and trading events, period. And so it's just a report. We're also going to, of course, the report will come to us and we can discuss and vote on it at that time as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And you're in agreement with that, Councillor Gaur? Let's call the question on the amended motion as just read. All those in favor? Thank you. That carries. Good discussion. Are there any notices of motion? What? 1 second, I have another one that jumped ahead of you. Okay. Notice of motion from Councillor Martin. It's a
Thank you.
notice of motion for the next meeting.
This is the notice of motion for the next meeting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've been hearing concerns from some residents that there are safety issues and possible conflicts between walkers and cyclists on the boardwalk in the community park. I know there are many residents who use e-bikes, which can reach very high speeds, and it is certainly nice to be able to ride beside the ocean. We want to encourage cycling and alternatives to car use, but I also want to ensure people of all ages are safe walking along the boardwalk with strollers, dogs, and mobility aids. The boardwalk itself is very busy and rather narrow, so perhaps people should have to walk their bikes along that area, or we could consider times when no bikes are allowed. I will be bringing forward a motion to ask staff to look into options for safe use of boardwalk. And it may not be staff, it may be the council, but discuss it at the next meeting. And it might take a little while, like it did today, for this motion. Safe use of the boardwalk, and hope that my notice of motion today will give an opportunity to the public to weigh in on this issue. So it will come next time and we can have a motion and we'll discuss it. And if it has to go any further, then maybe the staff could help us with this, because this has been before the council before, apparently. And so we're going to have to, as a new council, consider this, because we want the community park to be used and for everybody, but safely.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Yes, I got your notice of motion. I thank you for bringing it forward. And I believe that is exactly the way that we could do it. I don't think we have to go committee, though. I would understand that the report from staff would be in part of our discussion and debate on what that would look like, as the staff are going to come up with a couple of options, as you said. So I think that's perfect format to do that. Yeah, thank you for bringing that forward. Councillor Gaur, do you have a notice of motion today?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. And this is for the Council of City of Parksville to endorse Councillor Wood to stand for election of FCM Board of Directors for the next year.
Thank you. Yes. Are there any other notices of motion? None? Okay, we'll go over to liaison reports. Thank you, everyone. We'll move into liaison reports, and in the interest of efficiency, I would ask the council members keep their updates concise. Councillor Beal, would you like to provide your liaison report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to all of council. First of all, I did attend the meeting as a liaison to the Oceanside Community Arts Council. However, two of the board members did attend the most recent budget meeting and made a presentation at that time, sharing all many of the program information about many of the programs that are being offered by the Oceanside Community Arts Council, as well as activities that are at the MAC. So I won't go into that any further at this time, but I do encourage people to see the exhibits that are shared at the Bayside, as well as some items that have gone to Tinamera, and also the ongoing and changing presentations at the MAC, that's the Macmillan Arts Center. The second liaison report, I am the appointed to the Vancouver Island Library Board. And now that particular meeting, at that meeting, there was a 235-page document to read ahead of time. And the meeting, which normally would go from 9:30 till 12, went until just after 2, but I won't take that long here, I promise. Okay, but a lot of work has been going into updating the facilities master plan, which looks at the whole, all of the library system, and some people don't understand that although it's Vancouver Island Regional Library, it actually includes coastal communities, including Bella Coola and Haida Gwaii. So it really covers a huge area with just under 40 communities represented in the library. So people may have heard about a recent announcement from the provincial government that $45 million has been awarded to libraries. That's all of British Columbia libraries. So Vancouver, Victoria, the regional, Kelowna, and ours. And that's for a 3-year period. So at the end of the day, it may be about $2 million for our library system. Again, that covers from Souk all the way up to Haida Gwaii. So it's not just here in our particular branch. That might not go as far as it might sound. Also, I'll just share that the #1 goal in the strategic plan is actually to work on improving literacy for residents everywhere. And so there will be a lot of activities and events to support that effort. That's since Councillor Frass is here, I was prepared to present on the Phil St. Luke Standing Committee, but perhaps Councillor Frass has that in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beal. We have one more, Councillor Fraz and or Beal, maybe jointly as you choose for, give Councillor Fraz the lead in to the Phil St. Luke Standing Committee update.
Thank you. I'll keep this really short here. Just let you know that we had our first meeting of the committee on the 27th last Monday, 10 a.m. Myself, Councillor Beal are in attendance, as well as a couple of their committee members. Just touch on the opening of it, kind of where we're at, the introduction of the fundraising, how that's going. We're going to have the minutes and that put out here at some point too for everyone to recap on it. But right now we're meeting about once a month. I think our next meeting is planned for 3 weeks from now. Be here at 10 a.m. I think on the 25th is what we're looking at. And yeah, things are going well for right now. Just leave it at that, keep it brief. If I may though as well, add on just on a different topic, just it's one that I missed again added onto the agenda here, but it's in regards to the Brant Wildlife Festival. It's going on right now, just kicked off on the 31st. It's happening until April 9th. They've had a huge success so far with sold out lift off at the Bayside. They said they had standing room only. Of course, City of Parksville is one of the main sponsors as well, which they're extremely happy for. There's a bunch of events going on right now that people can look online through their website. They are booking up pretty quick, but it looks like a pretty fun lineup with some, I think, bonus events happening on into mid-April as well. They did say one of their biggest problems they're having right now, though, is in this next 2 weeks is when they're expecting most of the Brants to come through. And there's a lot of dogs on the beaches still. I think people are just not aware of it because they're going down to enjoy it, the nice weather, springtime, and not everyone's on Facebook or watching the city website because we do have it posted. And it's hard to kind of respond to those requests of when there's a dog running loose there. So, you know, if you can share it with people, let them know that during this time of the year, dogs are not permitted on the beach, even if they're on leash. So that's the update that I have for now.
Thank you, Councillor Fraz. Councillor Beal, can you add any further to the on joint with Councillor Fraz on Phil St. Luke Standing Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would like to add that for anyone in the audience or listening at home, that if you would like to make a donation to support the efforts to get a statue for Phil St. Luke, that one can do an e-transfer, and that's through Gmail, but also one can go in person to Coastal Community Credit Union locations. So that's here, Qualicum Beach, Nanu's, and just mention that Flying Phil and they will have that information. So that's one of the ways that people can do that, or through a GoFundMe campaign, but there'll be more information. There's a Flying Phil fan page on Facebook, and get information there as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other liaison reports at this time? Is there any further new business? Thank you. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation under special business pursuant to section 91C and E of the Community Charter? Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider items relating to labor relations and the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements. I have a mover and a seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Gaur. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. We'll move into in camera now. Thank you all for attending, and